First of all, we got to thank Deacon Kevin for pronouncing 42 names that most of us don't know very much about and don't hear them very often. But more importantly, today we hear how all through the Old Testament, the Hebrew people were waiting for the Christ, the Savior, the Anointed One, Jesus. And we hear all the way back, 1,800 years from Abraham, all the way to Jesus, who is the Father of whom, and we hear how it finally comes to Jesus. And you and I know that we're just a week away from celebrating the birth of Jesus, and we know that for Mother Mary, for Joseph, and for the world, we wait. And even though it was 2,000 years ago, we don't want to forget how it came to be that God wanted this all to happen the way it did. Now, 42 generations, father, son, you could go all the way back, grandfather, great-grandfather. Think about your own grandparents. Some of you get to see your grandparents often, and some of you, they may live in another state. Maybe even for some of you, a grandmother or grandfather's no longer living, and you just hear the stories about them. Each one of them are important because they have helped you to be in the world, but I would suggest to you they've helped you to know about God. And that's something I'd like to suggest to you, fourth graders, today, that to talk to your grandmother or your grandfather, or even maybe it's a great-grandfather, great-grandmother, and ask them stories about when they lived, as they had children, as they've had grandchildren, what's really been important to them. And then, I want your last question to be how they saw and understood God bringing all of this to happen. Ask them about God. If you're sending them Christmas cards, if you're sending them a letter, if you're sending them an email, whatever it would be, ask them about that and see how they might respond, and it would be wonderful. I did not get to know my grandfather, Camp Schneider. He had died actually before my mother and father married, so I've only heard stories about him. I don't know what he would tell me about faith. I do know, though, each of my grandmothers, my grandmother Camp Schneider, my grandmother Spenner, I know what they would tell me about because I saw it. I saw them go to church. I saw them pray with their prayer books that they would bring. I saw them pray with their rosary. And I have an idea what they would talk about. But I'd encourage you, as we're thinking about all the ways God worked, all through the Bible, how He's still working in you and your family today. And how, as we're about getting ready to celebrate the birth of Jesus, we also would be aware of how we are growing in faith. When I was a priest living in Rome, one summer I wanted to go to all the places where my family was from in Germany. And when I would go to those towns in Germany, I would go to the churches. And sometimes I talked to the priest there. Sometimes the priest wasn't there. Sometimes I got records. But I always wanted to go one place in the church. I always wanted to go where the baptismal pool or the font was, because there is where my spiritual life was strengthened and continued. And that's why at every time we have a baptism here, we always have the candle lit. It reminds us of the light of Christ in us. So we're praying for the light of Jesus coming into a world, the light that is within a spiritual light, a spiritual life. So this morning, let's be aware how we've been blessed with our mothers and fathers who have taught us about Jesus, how our grandmothers and our grandfathers have done that as well, and how we are to grow from that way as we get ready for the birth of Jesus.